Rail today, it's a complex system of a kind of a patchwork of different national solutions. And today I think the passengers are also experiencing that. For example, when they are crossing border.
It's important to understand that a single European railway area isn't just infrastructure.
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the European Railcast, a podcast about the future of European mobility, brought to you by EU Rail, the European Partnership for Rail Research and Innovation under the EU's Horizon Europe programme. I'm Karen Coleman, a journalist and broadcaster from Ireland specialising in EU affairs, and I'm the host of this podcast series. Do you dream of travelling around Europe by train, whizzing through countrysides and cities, departing from Amsterdam and waking up in Florence? Dining in comfort, relaxing in style, being stress-free, enjoying affordable travel that enables you to sit back and enjoy your journey, knowing that you can arrive directly in the city centre on your train on time. Or maybe you want to start your morning in one country and be in another for a business meeting by lunchtime, working comfortably on the train along the way thanks to a suitable working environment. Well, for many travellers, such smooth journeys are commonplace, with a lot of work already done to improve rail networks and train services and to make rail travel safer and more efficient and affordable for passengers. But there's still room for improvement. And that's where EU Rail comes in. It wants to deliver a high-capacity, integrated European railway network, but to achieve this, barriers to interoperability need to be removed. Solutions for fully integrated rail systems and services have to be found, and faster uptake and deployment of innovation through funded projects has to be achieved. So what can be done? And what is being done to create a single European railway area? And specifically, what is EU Rail doing to create a more connected Europe by rail, with innovation and cost-effective rail solutions enabling travellers to enjoy their journeys across the EU? Well, these are some of the questions we'll be exploring in this podcast series. And in this first episode, we'll find out more about EU Rail and how it's contributing to the goal of creating a single European railway area. We'll also hear from Kristian Schmidt, Director for Land Transport at the European Commission. But for now, I'd like to introduce our main guest, Giorgio Travaini, Executive Director of Europe's Rail Joint Undertaking, known as EU Rail. Giorgio, welcome to this first podcast of this series. Maybe to start off, could you tell us a little bit more about how the rail system in Europe works today? And for someone who travels or works in rail, what does the current landscape look like?
Thank you, Karen. The European system, let me start with a positive aspect. It works because it provides a transport solution for all our European citizens and businesses at the end through a green and sustainable transport solution, and it also allows actually our economies to grow. But there are clearly inefficiency, and this means that we still have work to do. So rail today, it's a complex system of a kind of a patchwork of different national solutions. And those national solutions has been developed because of historical legacy reasons, and they have in them some technical specifications. So different systems that needs to coexist together. And today, I think the passengers are also experiencing that. For example, when they are crossing border, it appears that sometimes the train is slowing down because it requires a change of operation or even a change of locomotive. And these are simply symptoms of this fragmentation of the rail system. Similarly, passenger also, the information that they receive in international travel sometimes is not fully synchronized because the system, also the digital system, are different. And if you look into, let's say, the real operation, those are working for rail, the complexity, it's even greater. So engineers need to make and design solutions that works for everywhere in Europe and those solutions are different. So often it's about bespoke products. And then it's also for those that are operating railways. Also, the operational rules differs today across Europe. So there is a complexity that create also a system that is not efficient enough and that can simply improve. And this is what Europe's rail today is working at.
So, a lot of different systems, there's fragmentation. So, what do you see then as the key challenges preventing it from working seamlessly, from rail services, networks being able to work, if you like, as one?
Well, we have several challenges. So the first one that is linked to this technical fragmentation, it's also about how do we address the existing legacy system, because you cannot simply replace them from one day to another. And it's also linked to the long life cycle of the rail product and solutions. For example, a train is not like a car. A car, the consumer are changing it, I don't know, every 5 years or so. A train lifetime is 40 years. So the infrastructure is there and built to last 100 years. So the question and the challenge is how do we introduce the change? How do we harmonize? But then in parallel, we don't have to forget that we are there to meet customer requirements. And the customer requirements are changing. There is more and more digital demand, demand for services that require digital solution. Why this is a challenge, but is also an opportunity. And then also the other challenges that the rail sector, but like other many sector are experiencing today, is the workforce shortage and the demographical challenges in general. So also there, innovation, digitalization, I think will help us to address these, but we need to do it in a coordinated approach. So no single actor today can address those system challenges at European scale alone. And so that's why it's important, this coordinated approach. And this is also a challenge per se.
So, what impact does that kind of fragmentation, different technical standards, different procedures across EU countries, what impact does that have on rail services across the EU for both passengers and also for freight? Because sometimes we can forget about the impact on freight.
You can see that in Europe, you have traffic management systems that are managed at best at national level, but those needs to be talked one with each other. And so this is one of the aspects that obviously we needed to improve to create this interoperability of movement, of flow of trains across borders as well. If you're looking into the freight service, this appears even more evident. Why? Because freight services don't have the priority. So you know that the rail network often uses the same infrastructure for passenger and freight, and the priority is given to passenger. So in case of disruption, freight services usually are, waiting for the disruption to get back and to start service operation. But this requires a complex coordination across countries because freight, by definition, is international. So we're transporting goods from different countries. And this, by the way, works. It's not that it doesn't work. You know, during COVID time, thanks to rail freight, we were actually able to ensure that goods were dispatched all over Europe. And this is clearly a resilient service, but it needs to be coordinated and it needs also to become very much competitive, especially against the road. And this competitiveness comes from the simplifications and from the effectiveness of running trains that are on time, running trains that deliver their goods with an estimation time of arrival which is correct, and as well an appropriate cost, obviously. Why this? Because transporting goods by rail is significantly good for the environment, because the energy efficiency that you have by transporting rail, there is no other transport mode that can match this, simply because when it is a connection between train and infrastructure, is steel against steel, and the train, when gets speed, it kind of glides, and so it consumes not a lot of energy.
And I can imagine having that sort of seamless journey, particularly for freight. For goods, we'll say, that are perishable, you need to get them from A to B quickly. Being able to guarantee that sort of a system, I can imagine how attractive that would be, and maybe enable freight companies to start moving more into the train area to transport their goods. Can you tell us just a little bit more of what EU Rail is doing, and especially when it comes to tackling the likes of fragmentation and system complexity across the rail networks?
Yes, so Europe's Rail, it's a public-private partnership between the European Union and the rail sector. And per se has a simple mission to create all the conditions to have the single European rail area, which is the topic of today. And for this, we needed clearly to innovate, bring down the barriers that currently exist, and making sure that we do it in a coordinated manner with all the involved stakeholders. Obviously, you need to have a certain program with resources to do that. And we have a big program of 1.2 billion euros to achieve exactly that. And our approach is to start with research and innovation on different so-called flagship area. Uh, One of them is transforming the way how the traffic of the rail system is managed. As I have mentioned before, it's a key component to make the entire system working flawlessly. And it starts from the planning to the control to the end services that are provided across European borders. And it includes also innovative elements like the use of artificial intelligence to calculate real-time and on-demand driven type of operations, which today we don't have. Then we're also looking into advancing automation and digitalization solutions because those will simply drive down the cost, but also ensure that the quality of services will become also harmonized across Europe as soon as all those elements are introduced into the system. We're also looking on intelligent way to address the different assets, being the train, being the infrastructure, how those are managed, how those are maintained. Also here looking a lot about the digitalization opportunities and innovation, because if the assets, the downtime for maintenance, for example, is reduced, it means better services at the end for the passengers and the businesses. And also reducing the life cycle cost of those elements. It's very important because then it will increase the competitiveness of this sector. And again, benefit at the end everyone that is using it. And the fourth element that I would like to bring forward, it's about the standardization, because we have a specific element in our program, which we call the system pillar. We are looking at the system approach, not only each single components and subsystem, but really the entire system, how it can be standardized. And it's about standardization of interfaces and then getting those either in regulations, if those concern safety and interoperability, or into voluntary standardization that the sector will take up. And then lastly, the last point that we're working on to make the single European rail area, it's moving from talking to testing with research and innovation, to standardizing, but also to implementing. So we're looking also at implementation strategies. We don't have a budget for the deployment, but implementation strategy on how we migrate and how we deploy the systems, so that including the financial element, so that we give the best possibility for this to happen. And looking into the future, I think that our next steps will also be to facilitate this implementation.
Well, I mean, it's very challenging what you're talking about doing and what the aim is, because I can imagine, different countries maybe at different uh, times of development and layers of development. What do you see as the big challenges, though, to ensure all the countries that you're talking about within the bloc and Europe in general, that they can get their railway networks to be able to connect better so that they run smoother?
Well, first of all, you are absolutely right. The big challenge is that today different part of Europe are at different implementation speed. So how do we not harmonize that, but how do we coordinate this? And I think this is the first challenge, and it's simply not an option for many system approaches. One of them, I just give you an example. We would like to revitalize the freight, and one way is to introduce innovation that allow freights to reduce the transit time, to reduce the formation of the train, and we have a technology which is called digital automatic coupler, simply coupling the wagons automatically and uncoupling them as well, but also bringing electricity through the wagons and communication through the wagons that today does not exist. These require what? What these require to change the 500,000 wagons that today exist and that are all over Europe. You can see the gigantic task ahead of us, and this task needs to be coordinated across countries and across stakeholders. This is what we have already started to do, and as I said, it's simply not an option, it's a reality in the sense if you want to introduce positive transformation into the rail system, you needed to have countries coordinating one with each other for their own benefit. Because at the end, when we create a bigger internal market without barriers, everybody is benefit this. And it's not just, abstract value, because you can imagine industries that are using train for logistic flow that will make more business simply because the traffic flows are more efficient. We will have better value for passenger being citizens also of the European Union, and so on and so forth, bringing also possibly, not possibly, but if you have more by rail, you will also meet your environmental objectives that you have at country level and that you have at European Union level. Just think that transport per se accounts for 25% of the greenhouse gas emission, and rail only produce and counts for that 0.4% of it. And luckily, it's having much more market share than 0.4%. So it means it's a very effective way to make it happen. And also, I think strategically, it's also very important for all the countries to consider this, because the rail sector is one of the few European sector which are still leading worldwide in terms of exportation, in terms of technological level, and so we want only to strengthen these strength.
Well, actually, you encapsulated answers to the next question I was going to ask you, Giorgio, which was more broadly about the general benefits of making the shift to a more integrated European railway system, so that people listening to this podcast can get an idea now of what might be possible. Are there examples of where now we're seeing success stories in that regard out there?
So if today the passenger is already experiencing flawless transition across countries, they don't know that behind there are very complex systems that change, for example, just to give a practical example, the way how the energy is gathered from the infrastructure, simply because the different electrical system are different in the different countries, or even the signaling system. And the one good example of the signaling system, so the way how we can run the speed of the train and when the train needs to safely stop, etc., etc. This is the signaling system. It was different across countries until a few years ago. Is still to a certain extent, but we have developed in Europe a European system which is called European Rail Traffic Management System, ERTMS, which allow to have one single system that can work across different countries without having to develop different signaling system inside the same locomotive, inside the same train, inside the different infrastructure management systems. At the same time, innovating. So making sure that while we are harmonizing, we're also bringing new technology that will allow us, for example, to have more train fitting on the same infrastructure. So meaning that train will be closer together, traveling to a distance closer together, but still with the same safety level, very good safety level that rail has.
And just very quickly, in terms of tracks and infrastructure, are there major changes that need to be done there, or are they in the larger scheme of things, especially when you talk about digitalization and other factors that are coming in, are they not as big obstacles perhaps as we might have thought in the past?
So there are technical solutions that are developed, for example, to change the distances between the wheels of a train in an automatic way to adapt to that. And so these will remain. Although there are things, especially in the area of digitalization, like, for example, the signaling systems, where we can really make a change where, through the digitalization, we create from the start products and solutions that are standardized or designed in an interoperable way from the start.
To complement my conversation with Giorgio and to provide a broader perspective, we also spoke with Kristian Schmidt, Director for Land Transport at the European Commission. He shared what's being done at an EU level to help turn the vision of a single European railway area into a reality. From infrastructure management to ticketing and high-speed rail, here's what he had to say.
Well, a single European railway area is what we all hope for. It's important to understand that a single European railway area isn't just infrastructure. The rules, the national rules developed by member states and their authorities over decades for safety, but also just the way of running railways, they are good historic reasons for why they were developed. But if you want a single European railway area, those rules need to be completely harmonized. And of course, one of the good examples of that is the European Rail Traffic Management System, ERTMS, or as I like to call it, ERTMS stands for Everything Really Turns Much Simpler, because it means that trains will have only that one system. I think everybody agrees that rail is green, but being green in itself is not enough to see the modal share of rail grow. At the end of the day, it's the shippers or the passengers who decide whether to take a rail or go for road or any other mode of transport. So it's about affordability at the end of the day. And here, I think, again, we have a lot of way to go before we can say that rail isn't just green, but also affordable. If you take rail freight, for instance, here, clearly it is the most energy efficient. It is the one that sort of is less dependent on fossil fuels, air pollution. It corresponds to all the society objectives that we have on our transport mode. But what it's not yet sufficiently is reliable, punctual, and then the best business proposition from a service point of view. And you could say the same thing for passenger rail. I really truly believe that there is a unmet demand from rail passengers across Europe, people who want to take the train, but who do not find it sufficiently cheap, or the offer is not with enough frequencies, departures, and options for combining and finding tickets. So that forces us to look at the cost drivers behind that. And of course, there's a whole long list of cost drivers in rail, drivers that we must work hard to overcome. The Commission has done, and I would say the European Union has done a lot already to create the single European railway area, but our work is certainly not done. We have 4 railway packages that theoretically opens up the market to competition, to operations cross-border. We have drawn together, and you may see it on the map behind me, a map, so a vision of the 10T network, so the main rail corridors across Europe. But what we're still working on is to make sure that behind these lines on the map is also a common standard for signaling, for trains that can operate on these corridors. And then this is what the Commission is working on very closely now with the co-legislators, Parliament and Council. How is this infrastructure managed? It does not work if in one country you optimize the use of the infrastructure, and you plan and give path allocations. Yes, this train can run from here to there, but when it reaches the border, we don't know whether there is a path for the train in the neighboring country. That means we need also to harmonize and coordinate more closely how we are managing this infrastructure. Then there are all kinds of obstacles on finding the offer, on ticketing. The Commission is planning a legislative proposal on ticketing so that passengers, find it a lot easier than it currently is to go and find an attractive rail offer. And often we need not just one, we need to combine two different legs of a journey. And ideally, that should be possible to buy that in one ticket, so that also as passenger, we have passenger rights. Then I talked about the infrastructure, but it's clear that, for instance, on high speed, if you want to have modal shift from aviation to rail, well, we need a truly European high-speed network. And for that, the Commission is working on presenting later in 2025, hopefully before the summer, a high-speed master plan that again takes this map behind me and sets out a vision for how actual high-speed rail services can be offered from city pair to city pair across Europe. High speed, as you know, in Europe is mainly in a few member states. In fact, 3/4 of the kilometers of high speed is concentrated in just 2 member states, Spain and France. And so I would certainly say the Commission's agenda for completing this single European area is very demanding, and our work is not yet done. So all this work on a stronger European network has become even more critical with Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We are in a new geopolitical situation. The map you see behind me, you can see the lines that are drawn into Ukraine, connecting that country with the rest of Europe. Everything that was important for the decarbonizing agenda, for reducing CO2 emissions, for improving rail for the civilian sector is also true in this new geopolitical context and for military mobility. And the good news are that in any single euro invested in improving military mobility is dual use. It's a euro that is also invested in strengthening the civilian capacity of the rail network. And so we have another good reason why we need to invest in rail, and that's military mobility in the coming years.
Many thanks again to Kristian Schmidt, Director for Land Transport at the European Commission. Well, as we just heard, the Commission is advancing on multiple fronts, from regulation to infrastructure, to help unify Europe's rail system. But bringing all of this together on the ground also depends on strong collaboration with industry and other stakeholders. So let's turn again to Giorgio now to hear more about EU Rail's role in making that vision a reality. I'm just going to ask you one final question, Giorgio, because it's been really interesting to hear about the challenges and then the amazing work that is already underway. When do you think we'll achieve a single European railway area? And maybe you could also just very quickly tell us how you envisage EU Rail's role in achieving that goal.
So I would like to achieve the single European rail area tomorrow. So very, very soon. Now the reality is that it will take some time, but there is a willingness from the sector. There is a willingness from the European Union to go into this direction. So I'm very confident and positive about it, but there is a lot of work to do. So what we need to do is really looking into how do we bridge the so-called valley of death, because we are achieving successful innovation or successful research results. How do we bring that and transition this gap between research and implementation? So this is for me what it's really needed as a next step to create this single European rail area, while at the same time continuing to innovate, obviously. And this requires significant effort. Well, the system changes cannot be implemented all at once. So they need also there a coordinated approach across countries. It's about investments, and it also requires in my opinion, to have some pre-deployment activities. So not simply launching billions of euros of renewals and change of investments all at once, but starting with some pre-deployment activities where they also demonstrate the benefit of doing this. And then we also need a continuous work that Europe's Rail is doing with the regulatory bodies. In this case, in Europe, we have the European Union Agency for Railways, which is setting, let's say, the technical rules to remove those administrative and technical barrier across border, and also making sure that the rail system remains safe. And so this continuous exchange will need still to be continued. And the last point that I think is needed to create this single European rail area is the human capital, is the people. So we need to believe in this. We need to have the engineering, the resources, the talents to do this, and also attracting new talents. Because at the end of working in rail is cool, because you have plenty of challenges to bring forward, and it is actually contrary maybe to the popular belief. There is a lot of innovation that is going on in there, and again, we needed to build this new race system together.
Well, on that point, we'll leave it. But Giorgio Travaini, Executive Director of Europe's Rail Joint Undertaking, EU Rail, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for helping us to understand a little bit more about what EU Rail is doing towards overcoming fragmentation, developing harmonised specifications, and supporting the creation of a true European single railway area. And thank you too for sharing the bigger picture of why reducing the likes of fragmentation matters, how standardisation supports competitiveness and sustainability, and what's still needed to move European rail into the future. Thank you very much. And this podcast was brought to you by EU Rail, the European Partnership for Rail Research and Innovation under the European Horizon Europe programme. From me, Karen Coleman, it's been a pleasure having you with us today. I'd like to thank all the team involved in the European Railcast, a podcast about the future of European mobility. And please do stay tuned for future podcasts in this series. See you soon.